Okay. As always, I just start with an opening remark for everyone, whoever jumps into this recording, that this is just a dialogue among friends who are trying to make sense of the material from Awakening of the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. And our intention over here is nothing more than trying to make sense of it collectively through open dialogue and sharing our understanding and hopefully enriching each other's understanding through that process.
That only one more thing to that introduction is that we're actually interested in knowing to actually how to do it in our lives.
That's right.
Not just to understand it and say it. It's application is key, right?
Thank you so much, Michael. As always, absolutely.
Okay,
Cam,
great.
any other opening comments from your side?
Well, I'll pile on to what Michael just said. Because I think it's in episode 8 is when he talks about the necessity of what is the term when you say do it? You have the intellectual knowing and you have the existential.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to solve both an intellectual understanding, like you're trying to understand. He talks about the difference between language to teach and language to know, I think is how he frames it. But anyway, so both of those are important. So it's not just like you were saying, Michael, it's not just the intellectual understanding, but it's also knowing how to use that understanding, apply that understanding in a real-time existential problem-solving mode, I guess is how I'll leave it.
Well, he also talks about different kinds of knowing: procedural, perspectival, and participatory.
I think those get introduced much later in the course. You're absolutely right.
Well, that's in this is in number 6 actually, or 5. That's what my notes. Yeah, that's from 6. From number 6, that's when he first mentions it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So you want to summarize 5? The episode 5 is about Plato and the cave and the metaphor of cave and how Plato thought about the whole idea of sacred and meaning and reality.
Yeah, that was the most useful description of that cave metaphor I've ever heard. And I've heard it so many times, I never understood it until Vervaeke said it. I was like, God, thank you. So do you mind if I jump off on that one?
Please.
Okay, and please tell me if you guys think I missed something or I got it wrong. So my understanding of the cave metaphor is that in terms of how we perceive the world, most of us are like sitting in a cave watching the shadows that flicker against the wall from either a light source from outside, or I think he said it was a flame within the cave, actually. And we think that's reality. But then if we're brave enough to turn around and actually look to the entrance of the cave, we will be challenged because we're not used to the light, and the light will blind us at first, and we need time to acclimate each time we take a step towards that. But eventually, when we make our way out to the entrance of the cave, we realize that there's this whole world that we didn't see before, that we weren't aware of. And it actually, it's good for us. It's not like it's just different. It's actually uplifting because it's more relevance, more reality. And then once we get that and it benefits us, we try to tell other people who are still in the cave looking at the shadows, and they're resistant and they're judgmental and they think we're crazy. And that's one of the reasons when you have that sort of experience, it's actually hard to share it in a way where people can grasp it because they have no idea what you're talking about. Something like that. What do you guys think? What did I miss on that, or do you have something to add?
I think the metaphor is accurately described.
Okay, good. Yeah, so that's my hit on that, and thank God for Vervaeke for straightening that up for me. I never got it before. I thought it was kind of dumb until he straightened me out. So, I also want to mention something I found fascinating is that his definition of prophet in the 5th episode, one who wakes people to their mistakes as opposed to predicting the future.
That was good.
Yeah, I love that, because I'm like, oh, okay, that seems reachable. Where predicting the future, good luck. I don't think anyone can do that very well.
Yeah.
So
I'm going through my notes, and I think one of the things what I really found interesting, and I think I said that, I'll summarize it, is that he has a very simple way of 3 psychological levels, Plato does, of man, lion, and monster.
yes.
Man is the rational, reasoning, long-term goals, and chest or lion is what he describes as social, worried about status and worried about shame and honor, like something that is. And the third is like appetite, the monster, the drive for pleasure, pain, avoiding
Control,
pain, and so forth.
Yep.
So it's very interesting that he describes that as 3 different psychological levels, and then he describes in simple terms that why you have to learn how to tame the lion, and and control the monster, right? So it's very interesting. The metaphor he uses that actually speaks to what we need to do in our life, like not tame the lion, not be too driven by status or prestige or external factors, and definitely have our appetites under control, or have a sense of what's appropriate appetite, a drive for pleasure and pain. I found that always simple yet profound.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I've been studying the modern neuroscience very deeply, and I'm absolutely blown away how close that model is to what modern neuroscience is saying is true. It's incredible. It's like, so these guys who had none of our tools, not even our scientific method, came up with that back how many thousands of years ago? I mean, was it 1500 years? I can't remember it, but anyway, it was like, that's really incredible to see.
Can you give a brief overlay?
Oh, sure. So I'll just talk about polyvagal theory, because that's the one I know so most fluently. So what polyvagal teaches us is that our neuroception, which is our automatic assessment of our environment subconsciously, is what decides how we will be 98% of the time, and it does that based on its assessment. And some of it's filtered through your experiences, some of it's genetically oriented in terms of like snakes are afraid, or spark fear, an offensive response or freeze response in every human in the world. Now you can acclimate to snakes and not be as afraid, but your subconscious system will always immediately activate. And then if you can modify it through training, but even Eskimos who never saw a snake before, if you show them one, they're like, whoa. So basically what they're explaining is that your subconscious system is a separate consciousness to your conscious mind. And they're not coordinated usually. Now they can be, and you can work on it. But what happens is that the conscious mind has an agenda, and then the subconscious mind has its own. And if you don't honor that subconscious system, if you don't learn how to, quote, tame it, it will fucking run you. And this is, anyone with PTSD knows this, because they do things they don't mean to. They don't remember things properly, because when they get triggered, they go into a state that's almost like a hypnotic state of reaction. That's a flashback. And it's more about the past than the present. So therefore they overlay the present from the past, and it's all muddled because you're not present, right? You're not in reality now. And the thing that's even wilder is that the way to tame that is through the heart and lungs mostly. So if you do pranayama breath work, if you do face-to-face interaction with people like you guys do in the workshop, you're doing motions of proprioceptive awareness and relationship to nature, that's what builds the strength of the heart and lung system. And that's what controls the level of activation that you have appropriately or not with your environment. So the more you activate heart, lung, and face into the environment, the more you'll be able to respond subconsciously appropriately, instead of being maladaptive in your responses, which is what happens when you can't control your emotions and someone pisses you off at work and you scream at them and then you get fired, or you attack your partner because they remind you of your parent, or on and on and on, right? You're afraid to go driving. So the fact that they even mention the heart as a way of taming all this, is just incredible to me. When I read it, I was like, holy shit. Like so much for we figured this out recently. That's not true. We actually did not. We actually, and even the fact that the relevance realization and the virtual engine of habit formation is so easy for me to see how this relates to polyvagal and what I've learned. It totally, the overlay is very close. And I actually think that Vervaeke has extra things to offer because he's offering, he's not just focused on neuroscience, he's focused on kind of a broader approach, even spiritual to some degree. And that doesn't mean the neuroscience doesn't support that. It's just, I think this is more relatable in terms of action than a lot of the science I've read. That's all. And even the workshop, the evolve, move, play. You guys have so much of the correct stimulus interaction neuroscience embedded in your program that I was just really blown away and pleased by that. Because it's a way to train your virtual engine is you need to train your nervous system to be appropriately responsive to the environment, so that, because there's no way you can think your way through everything. It has to be appropriately aligned. Otherwise you are guaranteed to fuck up. As one of my colleagues, Deb Dana, said, she goes, if there's an argument between the brain and the body always wins. So that's your subconscious system, which has not as many neurons as a dog's brain. It's incredibly perceptive because that's its job. And it's not always right, but it's often more right than you think. Because you meet someone that it doesn't like, but your brain says they're fine. You find out later that your freaking body was right. That you shouldn't have engaged with them because your body knew there was something wrong with them, but your brain was fooled by their charm and their outfit and the way they talked, when your body kept saying, no, 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 fuck this, get away from me. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a summary, but.
Yeah, no, that was good. And the last part you said, I was just thinking of like, okay, how do we train our intuition so that we are better listening to those bodily responses, but not fooling ourselves from our trauma? Right? Like I'm scared of the snake is a bodily response. That's not true. This person is a terrible person. That's a bodily response that is true.
Or could be
true. How do I separate those to create reliable systems?
Well, my best guess, and this, I'm saying it's a guess because I'm working on this. I'm trying to figure it out myself, and I'm doing lots of practices and research, is that it involves a covenant between your conscious mind and that unconscious system. Because as long as they're arguing, you have depression, anxiety, and kind of unease, because you have these two major systems battling rather than coming to an understanding. And the window is body sensations. So when you learn what body sensations, thoughts, and feelings relate to what nervous system activation state, then you know what your nervous system thinks about what's happening. Doesn't mean it's right. And then you can use your conscious mind to say, okay, is that reasonable? And sometimes you won't know because it's too complicated, but often you're like, wait a minute, I know this person, they're not dangerous. That's my past. I need to work on that. You can use practices to interrupt that response so that next time it's less and eventually it's nothing, it doesn't do that. There's therapies like neurofeedback that help. There's therapies like, what do you call it? Psychedelic experiences under therapeutic intervention that often can help as well. There's a lot, breath work, yoga, Feldenkrais, what you guys do, certain kinds of social connection, all can lead to that automatic, more adaptive kind of virtual engine, as he says in here, to help you succeed without trying so hard. There's also programs that I don't want to take up too much time with this, but there's programs I use in my practice that I used on myself first. So this is Safe and Sound Protocol, which is a sound therapy that retunes your brain to interpret sound properly in your environment. Because what was discovered by these scientists, Dr. Porges is the polyvagal theory guy, but many others, is that most dysfunctional, like cognitive problems, learning problems, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and even chronic illness is a dysfunction of sensory processing in the nervous system. So if you stimulate it with the right music, which is modified to calibrate your brain and your hearing system a certain way, it'll stop misinterpreting the environment so severely. And then it's a top-down regulation thing that cascades. And then there's another program after that where you listen to modified music, but then you do movements where you're bouncing, you're throwing a ball and catching it, you're batting a ball on a string, you're doing core exercises, and what that does is it reintegrates the body-brain connection correctly, and it also gets the brain regions to talk to each other without fighting. And that's a huge summary, by the way. It's more complicated, but that's the general gist. And those things have completely changed my life. Where before I had to will myself through everything, and now there's all this flow now in my experience, and even cognitively, my memory, everything, my learning. Because I'm dyslexic, I used to go into rages when I tried to read because it would hurt my brain. And after I did these programs, I can read for hours and not have any fatigue. And I also better emotional regulation and organization skills and so on and so forth. So that there's a lot to talk about here, because what John's proposing, I can't wait to hear what he actually says we should do, is what the neuroscientists that care about people's experience and their challenges are trying to unravel as well. So I'm really excited about learning more about what John thinks, how to build a virtual engine that actually can chug along and help you intuitively and automatically recognize bullshit, avoid being self-destructive, and moving towards a higher place. I mean, what's a better thing to study, as far as I'm concerned? Like, yeah, like Aristotle said, how much time are you putting into your what he said, your
character,
building your
character. Yeah,
that's a good question. So anyway, I don't want to take up more time. I hope I answered your question, Kyle. Was that coherent?
Yeah, that was great. There's a lot there for sure.
I mean, I could talk about this stuff for hours. So if you guys want to know more at some point, I'm totally willing to give you everything I know. It's been a passionate journey of recovery and discovery.
Cam, what do you have? Any reflections from chapter 5 and 6 you want to bring up?
A couple of things from the notes. He gave early on, he gives his meaning of the sacred as an inexhaustible fount of insight and intelligibility that is transformative of us.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that. I think that's a really great way to reframe wisdom.
Yeah. And I kind of connected that. So I was running through that sacred idea. It goes back to the metaphor of cave, and then later on to Aristotle's idea of virtual engine. What struck me second time on the cave metaphor is that reality is not what you see. Reality is behind what you see. Mm-hmm. Reality has to be figured out. And so that actually I've been studying Hindu and Buddhist spirituality. That is very consistent. Reality is not salience, not just the veneer, not just the shadows. That's not, your sensory stuff is not reality. Reality is how you go behind it. And this idea that you have to go behind it and then look at patterns that were not available to you through just sensory. And once you understand that pattern, then you are better in grip with reality. So this idea of conformity that Aristotle talks about in the very next session is that it's an never-ending process of you see some perceptions, you go behind it, one level behind it, like going into the light, and then some complexity, some pattern is revealed, and then you grasp it, and that's a better grasp than what you had before. That's an insight. And then you go beyond that, there's another pattern that reveals, and that's the infinite loop. Like, it's never-ending grasp of increasingly revealed reality. And I think I see virtual engine, so that's to me the cave metaphor. Yeah. Reality is outside rather than reality is what your senses give you. Reality is transcendent.
Although what I hear in that is like you're in the perennial pattern of constantly crawling out of a cave.
Exactly.
It's like you crawled out of a cave,
boom,
in a bigger cave.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Crawled out
exactly.
of that cave, you're in
Yeah.
a bigger cave. You're like
Yeah.
further,
Yeah.
and then it sounds like a virtual engine is a more reliable strategy to continuously get yourself out of the cave.
Yeah, or better,
Over and
the
over
metaphor
again.
of better grip, because
Mm.
the pattern becomes, because Aristotle actually describes how to get out of the cave, so to speak. Because I think in the cave metaphor, Plato is simply saying reality is in the shadows. It's just stuff outside, and you have to go out and find it. Whereas Aristotle is very prescriptive. He says, "Here's how you do it. You have a virtual generator and you have a virtual governor. Virtual generator generates all these options of reality, and virtual what do you call governor constrains all these options of reality. And if you have a right grip on it in your virtual engine, then you have a best grip on the underlying functional structure of anything. And that combination is how you get there. So it's not exactly full ideation, no constraints, or only constraints. And that, I think, is a mathematically a dynamical system view of how you grasp reality.
Yes. And I want to check this with the rest of you, because I thought what I heard him say is that when you have the correct virtual engine, the salience actually leads you to truth rather than to bullshit. Did I hear that right? Or is the salience just for distraction from your animal body that it wants to, to fuck, fight, and eat all the time, or whatever?
I understand it the way that you stated it, Michael.
Okay.
It's a loop. What I remember him saying was, he drew it on the board. He says you get that system going where what you find salient leads you to truth, and how you find truth improves your relevance realization
That's
process.
right. And it's an upward spiral because of that, because it learns and it maps better each time, something like that, right?
Yeah, I think he uses the term reciprocal opening.
Yeah, thank you. That's a better metaphor. I think that's helpful. And that, by the way, that totally matches what I just said about training your nervous system to be more adaptively responsive. It's the same thing. Because most of our processing of the world is subconscious. Anywhere from, it depends who you talk to, but most of the neuroscientists that I trust the most say it's less than 5% of your daily actions are conscious. The rest is all automatic. And some scientists that I trust say it's 1%. But I think it depends on your level of higher brain function. That's my what do you call it? Analysis at this point is that I believe the further you're away from traumatic activation and overwhelm, the more higher brain activation you have, the more conscious choice you get to have. And therefore, I think the relevance realization would build resilience into true choice rather than just being reactive or programmed a certain way. That's my guess.
So that leads me to another note that I have here, where he says fullness of being. So he's referring to the man, the monster, and the lion.
The lion, yep.
And he's saying the fullness of being is living in a manner that affords each of the three, so all three of those, as much freedom as possible without making either of the other two unsafe. So that's what was coming to me as I was listening to you describe that. So your working hypothesis or theory or understanding right now is that, I think I heard you say, the further you get from traumatic overwhelm, is that how you said it?
Yeah.
You gain greater higher order cognitive function, access to higher order cognitive function
more often,
which then does afford you get to the true choice where you can, instead of drinking to oblivion, the monster wants to consume, you actually have the choice to do something more moderate.
That's right.
It's more freedom.
So my understanding of what you said, Michael and Cam, is not the same around this salience. I don't believe so far or ever Vervaeke talks about salience as having a valence. He only talks about salience as what is going to grab your attention, what comes in your field of purview. And inherently, most of the time, especially in the Aristotelian context, it's not necessarily positive. It's just salience gives you a lot of possibilities. Like you can keep looking at all things, shiny objects that come to you. And to me, the way he talks about virtual engine is you will have lots of possibilities that you can create by looking at a lot of things. And that's your generator, what he calls. And then you will have to have the selector. You will have to have some way of relevance. Later on, he calls it relevance realization, where you'll have to choose from all the possibilities to limit to a few. And having the right balance between generating possibilities and constraining possibilities is really hard. But the virtual engine cannot run unchecked only in generating possibilities or only in constraining possibilities. So it's like you have to make sure both sides of the engine are working. And then the way Aristotle, I understand, ties it back to character is to say your character means developing virtues that keep both of those in check. So courage would be constraining yourself. Foolhardiness versus recklessness, right? Or cowardice. He says one is not acting enough, you're a coward. Foolhardiness is acting at every instance. And he says courage is balancing your virtual generator to say, when do I act right? So I think character is his way of saying how humans can manage their virtual generator.
Well,
that's how I took it.
Let me just read a definition that I got from ChatGPT about this.
Yeah.
And see, because I think you're kind of right, but I think we're both right. It says, John Vervaeke discusses the concept of salience in the context of cognitive science and meaning making. Salience refers to how certain aspects of one's environment or experiences stand out as more significant or more important than others. It involves the ability to identify what is most relevant or meaningful in a given situation. Vervaeke's work often explores how this process of salience landscaping is crucial for understanding how individuals navigate and make sense of the world around them, and how it plays a key role in the cultivation of wisdom and the resolution of the meaning crisis. This concept is part of his broader exploration of cognitive mechanisms and their relationship to philosophical and existential questions. So the way I interpreted that was, maybe it's because of what I know about neuroscience, is that the salience is mostly picked up from your subconscious. But when you change your salience orientation through practices and meditation, all that, you no longer are a slave to, I want to fuck that woman even though I'm married, because that's a terrible idea. And I'm not going to eat that chocolate cake because I'd rather be slim and healthy. Right. That kind of thing. So, but I think, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. My understanding is that it's like salience is the things that stand out to you. And you can embody or imaginally take on different perspectives, and that will change your salience landscaping, right? Things will stand out to you differently depending on where you're at.
And according to Aristotle, you would do that by character. By developing the character, you can say that is not salient to me anymore. This is salient to me because I have shaped my virtue, my character, to change my salience landscape internally.
And then, and then relevance is your relationship to those things. So if you're thirsty, cups in water will stand out to you.
Right.
And then cups that are graspable and immediately accessible, they become relevant to you. And but it's only relevant because you can grasp it. Right. So it's they're very close. There's definitely like a Venn diagram between like salience and relevance. But it's like when you're in those states, different things are standing out to your subconscious, right? Like if you're tired, And you're like, coffee machine stand out, or when my headlight was out in my car, all of a sudden all the headlights of every car, I'm like, wow, is everybody's fucking headlight out? But it was because that's like my salience landscaping was like picking up on those things that were relevant to like the frame that I was viewing the world through.
Absolutely. I think that was really helpful. I agree. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, I wanted to share this little tidbit. One of the things I learned from the neuroscience is that people with developmental delays, which I had because my home life was so chaotic and emotionally abusive, don't develop the neural networks that allow you to sort out dangerous people from safe people predictably. So you inevitably end up with terrible people that are bad for you because your nervous system doesn't know how to automatically tell you, no, that person's not okay. And I lived that reality for decades. And only recently have I been able to get that up and running. And now my body's pretty good at spotting people that are bad for me. But that wasn't true for years. And every single chronic pain person I work with trauma has that problem, which is really interesting. So that's a salience problem or a relevance problem. And it's neurological, so you can't think your way out of it. You actually have to change your neural networks to get it to work correctly.
Yeah, I think it's like the part of relevance realization is the making more real. It's like things stand out, and then the relevance is like the relationship that develops between it. And then as those things reciprocally open, as they like mutually reveal themselves more and more, these things become more and more relevant. The tracks of the animals, the sounds of the birds, they're becoming more relevant to me because I'm trying to hunt an animal. Now I have this distributed cognition in the world. The world is like more real, in bigger relationship, that more things are standing out, and I'm kind of like hopefully like going down like that path.
Well, and I think what you're pointing out too, when you're saying this, is one of the things he talks about that I thought was really important, is that there is such thing as the optimal performance design for a specific function. So in other words, the reason one knife is awesome and one isn't is because it freaking knifes really well, right? In other words, it does the knife thing the best. And I think what I understood is that the whole point of relevance realization is you being able to navigate yourself to your highest contribution by being in touch with reality through relevance. I mean, in other words, the relevance is reality-based, at least more often, and therefore you don't get fooled by false titillation and these things that distract you towards what really isn't to your best interest in the rest of the world. And then you develop into a person, you become the best contributor of your talent and ability possible. And that's what I'm hearing from the program is the main goal.
And I think the main thing is like tight feedback loops.
Yes, right. And accurate, tight and accurate, right? So you can continue to correct your misalignments and your misperceptions. And that's, I think, part of what the cave, you talked about coming out of the cave over and over. That's what I believe that is the more relevance realization you can muster and the more reality you map out, the more you expand yourself and become more and more capable and competent in the world, because you actually know when something happens, more likely what to do in response to solve the problem or face the issue, right? Especially coming from what you have to offer. That's my hit about what he's trying to tell us to do, or what we're headed for. I would hope, hopefully. Anyway, so we're going to go on to the other lectures. I know we're
lecture number 7 was about Aristotle's worldview and Eric Fromm, and the many ideas in there. The one I'll kick off with is this idea of just agent arena relationship. He talks for the first time, and the fact that there are two existential mode, and you have to be an agent and contact with the reality around you arena. And co-identification of the two. It's not just you. And just like Kyle was saying, it's not just you, but you, the agent, engaging with your environment, and the environment then shaping you, and then you identifying new opportunities in the arena and so forth. That's what I took away. And he said, when both of those are in concert, we have what he calls nomological order, or we have better sense of reality.
Yeah, we actually had an interesting day in that context. We spent the morning playing out in the woods, and then we spent the afternoon playing in T-Mobile headquarters.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And it was right. And like, as an agent entering into an arena, I like had to change my costume, right, in order to better fit that agent arena relationship. Like, if I would have came out there covered in mud, sticks and leaves and dirty and all my things, security might not have even let me in the arena.
That's
And so
right.
I think that the agent arena relationship is really profound, because it determines in a lot of ways the salience landscaping and the ways in which one can act to better fit the environment. If that makes sense. Like, I can't.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, this touches on something that maybe it's actually from.
Yes.
What's that from? Oh, is that something that I read, that maybe it was number 7. I don't remember. Oh, wait a minute. What happened to where'd they go? Maybe they're just because of the noise level.
We're just moving real quick.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's wait until you move, because I think this is very relevant to the conversation. Moving to a more appropriate salient environment, right, where there's no distracting sound.
I'm moving to a better arena.
There we go.
I saw the floor is. There you go.
There we are. Hey, guitar. Yay. So this is what you said, just reminded me of something that was in, I think, maybe even 7. But anyway, so what it's about is you have your abilities, and then you have the structure of your environment. And your environment constrains the potentials that you have. And therefore, you have to match your abilities to the environmental constraints, and that's what determines your outcomes more than anything else, right? So it's something that I've heard before and read about before, is that you have, like if you have a hill that's shaped a certain way and you roll a ball down it, its potentials are limited by the structure of the hill, right? I mean, you're most likely going to go in a certain spot because the hill's a certain shape. And he says your environment and your abilities that's how the potential is determined, or even potentials and also consequences of doing stuff is determined by those two things. And I don't know if he said this out loud, but I think he indicated that if you dismiss the fact that the environment has a huge impact on what you can or cannot do, then you're missing half the equation, because you're going to miss out on the fact that if you tweak your environment, you can maximize your output. You can't just do it from your head. You have to say, well, does my environment support what I'm aiming at? Or
so I just want to jump in there, because that's what we were doing today. So we're in a conference room that has tables and chairs in them, and we're playing the shoulder tag game, and people are self-constraining themselves in that environment. And I'm breaking frame, and I have a larger affordance landscape than the people I'm working with. So now I'm hiding under tables. I'm throwing chairs at people. I'm using my environment in ways that are right. It's like, you saying something right in there, but I'm using my environment to create more affordances, even though that's not the agent arena relationship. I'm breaking it.
Well, that you're expanding the frame for people is what you're doing, right? Because they have a certain constraint that they think is appropriate for that environment, but you're showing them that, but you can break that if you need to. and they hadn't thought of it. Like it just didn't feel right. And I think that's like a wisdom lesson
and
for them.
Actually, the reason he later on describes why agent arena relationships partly work is that in any agent arena relationship, the agent assigns identity to themselves and to the other participants. So in a certain way, the constraints come from the agent and the arena, not just physical. He gives the example of that if you are a teacher in class, then you're going to certainly, and you have students, then the agent arena relationship appropriately constrains the identity. He gives himself the identity of a teacher, and you're the students, and suddenly a lot of behavior and what's salient and what's appropriate gets constrained by that dynamic. That is not to say you can't change it, but that's why agent arena relationships are so important. And in Kyle's example, you are explicitly saying that I'm going to assign a different identity to everybody else. We are not in a conference room. We are in a playground, and think of this conference room as playground, and suddenly everything flips.
That's great. I agree. Thank you. That really helps. I think you're right. But it's a relationship, right? That's the other issue, right? It's relational.
Yes.
And by necessity or by reality or something.
And I think in Eric Fromm's idea, which really blew my mind, was this idea of having a having mode and a being mode. That I found was really, really insightful around, and he describes it so eloquently as it, like I'm grasping, I'm controlling. That's the having mode, possessing mode, versus I thou, where it's a relationship of reciprocity, and you're open to the exchange and changing because of the being mode. And I thought that's such a profound difference.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's absolutely key, because Ian McGilchrist talks about this. I mean, it's his whole premise of his whole theory, which is that if you're grasping for something, you're in left brain dominance. You only care about what you want. This is the primitive brain, right? You only care about getting what you want and having power and having control or manipulating. If you're right brain dominant, you care about integrating into the whole what you're seeing and thinking, what other people and information that comes towards you, and that you have a sense of the universe as being a connected, relational place rather than a isolated, fragmented space. So it's, the one is being, the other is doing, or attempting to control something. Yeah. Very good. Having. Yeah, exactly. Obtaining. That's what he says. Obtaining rather than being.
Then I think at the end of that lecture, there's a segue to Siddhartha's story and his insights around that. That's pretty interesting. And particularly how he describes his evolution around mindfulness. Any comment on that or any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Kim. I don't remember that part.
So I notice in there, he starts to use the word myth. He really makes the point about the myth being relevant, because it indicates, you used the word perennial a little while ago, perennial patterns that it's meaningful right now. That's what a myth is. It's because it's addressing perennial patterns that are relevant right now.
That's right. In the present.
And the insight that I think he was trying to convey with respect to Siddhartha is that it's a myth about the palace is a myth of the having mode. It's trying to resolve the existential problems solely through the having mode, and it at the exclusion of the being mode, and fails ultimately.
Yeah.
I guess I'd call that ego, right? That's probably what you'd be labeled as.
And what he describes pretty interesting about Siddhartha. He doesn't go deep into Siddhartha's Buddha's ultimate views on how to reduce suffering. But what's interesting is that he does summarize that the answer doesn't come from either complete self-renunciation, going to the mountains and starving yourself, and somehow that's like deprivation, nor is it going to come from complete self-indulgence. And I think this idea that you can't do both, you have to come back to the middle, and that transcendence will come from the middle, is a very Buddhist idea. And I think that's what Vervaeke is setting up here.
And he's showing how the Greeks thought the same thing, which is that the golden mean is the same thing. It's that balance, that surfing that line between one extreme and another, so that you can actually get a flow state in that correct way of attending to something.
Well, to pull this in from some of John's other work, is it's opponent processing, right? Which is what's happening.
Yes.
Your parasympathetic and your sympathetic systems are constantly competing for an equilibrium.
Yes.
And you have eminence and emergence, you have top down, you have bottom up, you have order, you have chaos. We have like so many examples and so many philosophies of two opposing forces, that's that virtual engine. You have you have chaos, which is like generator, and you have order, which is constrainer. And they have to be optimally kind of like pitted against each other, knowing you'll never be, as soon as you recognize that you're in equilibrium, that's like the moment that you're no longer in.
Exactly. It's another term for it is coincidence, the coincidence of opposites. And I think I believe that's actually a what do you call it? Not neuroscience, the quantum physics term, and which is saying that you can't exist without your opposite. So the opposite poles of a magnet have to be present for one of them to exist. So you can't have North Pole and not South Pole. And he says this is how the whole universe is structured. So and you need friction to exist. Like you couldn't run if you didn't have friction against the ground, right? If you had a frictionless environment, you couldn't do anything. Because
what that brings up for me is somehow in our political environment, that is the only place it doesn't work at all. Like these two
that's
polarities.
It's extreme that's an extreme polarity instead of a balanced one, right? Because you don't have any middle ground. It's all one or the other, and that's where the bullshit starts piling up on both sides because they're so blind. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, so I'm gonna push on that a little bit, because I do think that the political domain is subject to that same principle of you have to have the two poles.
Yes.
And probably what we experience in our contemporary political discourse is a predominance of the having mode, in the sense that I have to win, rather than actually appreciating the fact that we are operating according to a universal principle, and we're going to disagree, and that's the way it needs to be, and we can still appreciate that, whatever the proper balance is. That is the way that the polity must work.
Well, I agree with you, but you can tell it's imbalance, right? So you have the meaning crisis is showing up in this process of politics because people don't realize that the opposite is a valuable one, and that we need each other, but we have to battle out what we consider truth or salient until we come to some agreement about what we can move forward on. And if we didn't have both, it would be horribly imbalanced. I mean, I would never want just the democratic philosophy to rule the world. God, no, thanks. But at the same time, I wouldn't want an extreme version of conservatism to rule the world either, because both of them would cause imbalances that would be tyrannical and awful. Right?
It sounds like the difference that I hear, the insight that comes from listening to Cam is it's like competition versus cooperative.
Yes, I agree.
It's like these poles are not seeking a balance, they're seeking a win. But in parasympathetic and sympathetic, they're seeking a balance. They're like, I don't want to be fucking stressed out. They're like, I don't want to be sleeping. They're like, well, we gotta sometimes we gotta, right? And so maybe that's like a good frame.
Partly because I think later on Vervaeke says we are battling belief systems.
Yes.
That's all it is. So in a certain way, the content doesn't matter. You are just tied to a belief system, and that's an ideological belief system. And you're not going below the belief system. You're not trying to say, are you a virtuous person in your day-to-day life? Are you an honest person? Are you a kind person? Do you have skills? Like, you're not going below the layer of give me a list of beliefs you subscribe to, and I have different ones, and we're gonna fight it out, right? So I think
That's
some
well
of it
said.
is some of it is that, so much so that we have lost all other forms of knowing.
Well, I think it reflects what Plato. Wait a minute. Yeah, Plato was saying about. Oh no, it was Socrates. So the sophists were only considered
Yes.
with winning.
Yes.
The natural philosophers were only considered with breaking things down to their smallest parts. And he says, neither one of you have it right, because the naturalists don't care. There's no way to make a meaning out of that. So it doesn't serve the soul or the spirit. And the other one, if you only want to win, you don't care about truth or morals. That's damaging, right? So I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And the same with, when McGilchrist talks about the scientific method in the 1800s, I was fucking blown away, because here's what he said. The attitude of all the scientists back then is that we're all trying to figure out something that we don't know. The reason why I present my material to you for criticism is because you're going to help me figure out if I miss something, because both of us are concerned with truth. Now it's about being right.
Yeah.
And therefore the science is suffering, because we don't have real science going on. We have political ideology arguing and also supporting a view artificially, because you don't want to contradict it with science that says something different than you're supposed to believe, right? So here we go. Bullshit again. So
at the end of chapter or episode 8, I think Vervaeke said something in context of Siddhartha, like how much attention is paid to attention, how attention works, and how mindfulness is the art of attention. He calls it science of attention, like a very systematic study of how one should pay attention. And then one of the things I really liked was that the metaphor that attention is not a spotlight, but is a tuning fork. And I thought, like, you're just basically tuning yourself. That I thought somehow was making a certain object salient by tuning in. I found that metaphor to be somehow. So tuning is an optimization process. It's not just passively shining light and something is revealed process. It's like, I'm going to tune in and something is going to change on both sides, and suddenly something will become salient.
But that's really parallel to, I think it's the same thing as what quantum physics says about collapsing potential.
Wave function.
Right. Yeah, wave function. That's totally parallel to wave function. Collapse, which it's amazing. That was helpful.
Yeah, I think attunement it's probably one of the most important things that one could cultivate, because it requires so like, to be attuned to a person, to be attuned to an environment, requires all levels of attention.
Absolutely.
Like, to be truly attuned to my partner, like, I can't be mind wandering. I can't be fidgeting. I need to I'm taking in the electromagnetic waves. I'm taking in the body posture. I'm taking in all of the facial nuance. I'm taking in the environment and the light and the sounds, so that I can be in the best possible fitted relationship with that person, or that, more importantly, I think, that environment. That the ecosystem, Salient's landscaping is not that one thing stands out. It's that amongst an entire ecosystem, there are many things that are grabbing my attention.
Yeah,
right?
there's a constellation of things. Yes.
And then I need to choose the appropriate relevant action to move towards the highest order good, or to be living in the place of the agapic love, when you're really attuned, it's just when someone's attuned to you, that group, that feeling is is so magical. And I think we all deeply are wanting that. We just want someone to get us. Like, you don't get me. Like, you're not listening. And it's like,
yeah, and
then,
even what you said about, if you want to get to know someone, wrestle them. I mean, because what happens with that, and it's happened during the workshop, is you gain a sense of that person and yourself, the relation, so fast that you're at ease with them. You're both at ease. It's a trip. Like you're like, I'm good with you. I know you. Like you don't know shit, but you do, because it's not intellectual. It's like you got a sense of how you relate, and then you're good. It's amazing. I think it's the same
like
thing.
I see you guys today, and I haven't seen or talked to you in like months, and I just have that like that embodied like I still don't know you, but like I feel a sense of safety and relaxation in just speaking to you because of the relationship that we've had.
Yeah, I felt it when I saw you here. I felt that ease. Oh, it's Kyle. Great. Another great person that I feel comfortable with, that I know, and I barely know.
The guy who can pick up and throw me to the ground in any second. That's okay.
The guy can flip over a fence in a way that I'm not sure I'll ever attempt. But yeah, I mean, it's but even your voice, and that, of course, that's a big part of how we know each other, is our prosody. That's another whole thing I could go on about, but it's because our voice, tone, pitch, and rhythm, prosody, is one of the most accurate ways to know where someone else's nervous system is at. And if it's not prosodic, it's not, kind of a higher tone, then it means that they're either mad or they're afraid. So and then we would be repulsed by them usually, because your nervous system would say this person is not safe right now. Anyway, I could go on, but
I'm mindful of the time.
Yeah,
I'm going to conclude this session by stopping the recording right now. Thank you.
Okay.